Welcome to Exceptionally Speaking, the podcast where we explore how to better understand and support exceptional learners. I'm Dr. Meryl, and each week I sit down with dedicated educators, parents, and advocates to share real strategies, inspiring stories, and moments of hope. If you're enjoying these conversations or learning something new, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today, I'm happy to be joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Vanessa Ewing. Vanessa has spent more than 2 decades working in both gifted and special education, and she brings a depth of insight and compassion to every conversation. Over the years, Dr. Ewing's work has increasingly centered on something we both believe is vital, the psychological wellness of twice exceptional learners. Her experiences in the classroom as a leader and a researcher have led her to advocate fiercely for the mental health needs of gifted students and for the educators who support them. In this episode, we dive into the emotional and relational layers of gifted education. We talk about the complexities of 504 plans, the importance of understanding each student as an individual, and the often unseen mental health struggles that gifted learners experience. Vanessa offers encouragement for families and educators alike and reminds us that there's always hope and always another strategy to try. You can find more information about all our guests at hex24press.com. Please enjoy Exceptionally Speaking with Dr. Vanessa Ewing. Hey, Vanessa, it's so good to see you.
To see you.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast today. I'm super excited to talk to you. I think your insight is going to be really important for our listeners. I'd love to just jump in and hear a little bit more about you and what led you to the world of gifted and special education, and then eventually that psychological wellness piece for 2E students.
Yeah, I feel like I must have been, self or family analyzing without even realizing it. So, like a lot of people, I was drawn to psychology, by my mid-teens and started looking more and more into special education. And then within 6 months, gifted education. And it just really fit. And so that's pretty much what I've done ever since in different roles as counselor, teacher, administrator. It's like once you start looking at something, you see it everywhere, So
Yeah, absolutely.
even last night, I sat down. There's a little bar and restaurant up the street from my house. I was talking to the bartender for a minute, and she starts telling me her family story. And she's a brilliant woman. It's obvious as soon as she starts talking. And listening to her family tree, right, where they've got all these PhDs and scientists and kind of movers and shakers in the world, and people with schizophrenia and people that have committed suicide and all of these things happening in one family. And I just see that again and again. And I think looking at that kind of the lines between brilliance and insanity and what can be a gift in one area or one part of life can suddenly become a hindrance or a real disability in another environment or in another time,
Yeah, and I think really the focus and the twice exceptional expertise and interest is so needed, as we've seen in the field. There's a lot of gifted experts and a lot of special ed experts, but really that connection between the two is often missing. So I'd love to hear more on what you see as common masking techniques or ways that our gifted students with anxiety, depression, whatever the mental health challenges may be, how is that showing up in the classroom as far as masking goes?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, I think a lot of times the twice exceptional, it's kind of all lumped together, which is of course kind of crazy because what's dyslexia versus ADHD versus bipolar? I mean, those are very, very, very different things. And I think usually when we talk about twice exceptionality, it focuses on the academic pieces, maybe autism, but then also certainly dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ADHD. And I think what really needs a lot more attention are all of those more psychological or psychiatric wellness or illness signs, with starting with what you said, like anxiety or depression. I think because of traits like perfectionism, sometimes people pleasing, more introspection, so maybe less likely to be also an introversion, less likely to be emoting and talking about what's going on internally. On to the outside world, it doesn't necessarily look like there's anything going on, right? So I was thinking about all the research that's come out where they're like, no, I know it seems like there could be more depression or anxiety in the gifted world, but that's not really true when we look at the research. But I think what's happening with a lot of the research is they're asking others, right? And they're looking at X criteria. But when we ask the children themselves, they're like, yeah, right. I know some of the research that we've looked at in the last year or so, where it was 85,000 kids filling out this report on their self-reported feelings. And it was absolutely very statistically significant that these kids were saying, yes, I have depression. Yes, I have anxiety. But the teachers and the parents weren't saying that, right? It was the kids themselves. So I think it reminds me of a famous twice exceptional person. She has a show called Speechless, Carly Fleischman, and she's someone that they talk a lot about. She has autism and she's nonverbal. She's clearly very gifted as well. That piece isn't talked about before, but she said, why all this research on autism without ever going to a person with autism? It's all these people without autism that are the experts, which is insanity, really. I think that when we ask the kids themselves, they're feeling it, but it doesn't show up for all those reasons, not wanting to draw attention, being more private in some ways, having more perfectionism. There's a ton of stigma. I know as long as I had friends or family or students or clients I worked with that had a twice exceptionality, I was totally comfortable with that. And I could definitely relate in a lot of ways. And then in these last years, as I kind of got that label myself, it didn't feel good, And I thought, oh gosh, especially when you're talking about psychological things, like the world is not great. And people know that they're going to be judged or maybe looked at in kind of a way. I was at a meeting yesterday, we were talking about OCD for a gifted learner. And before, when we were talking generally about anxiety, it was like, oh, and when I said OCD, they're like, oh, it was like, oh, you're talking about this.
Yeah. You could almost feel the shift and the stigma being sprinkled on at that point, at even the mention of it. Yeah. Do you have uh, any stories off the top of your head that are, hey, here's a success story for a 2E student with a mental health disorder that really got the support they needed at school, or what you think could have done better for them?
Yeah. I was thinking about, and that's what I was looking up earlier. When I first started taking abnormal psychology, and we talked about what the kind of the 3Ds are if something becomes a disorder. And one is deviance, which on some levels you're like, oh, and the word deviance, I mean, give me a break. But by its very nature, someone who's gifted or twice exceptional is deviant in that they're far outside the norm or the average, right? But one is distress. And I guess what I would ask there is, where's that distress coming from? And then dysfunction. And so I think we have to look at, is the distress internal? Because absolutely sometimes the psychological wellness or illness, wherever it's falling on that spectrum, is causing distress, but sometimes the distress is because of the way the world is reacting. And then the dysfunction. So what's happening? Like, is the dysfunction again because of an impairment the individual has, or is it because of the way their school, their home, their family, their friends are reacting to that? But that's always helped me as far as figuring out when it's more situational or related to the individual themselves. I visited these homeschool families more recently, and I think that that's where I see it coming out more. It's like, how do we cater to the child instead of the child fitting into a mold? And luckily, I think we're really blessed in Colorado to be able to look at so many different models. It's overwhelming, right? It's sort of exciting for me. It's probably exciting for you because we're like in the education world. We're like, oh, and there's this type of school and this type of school. But it's super overwhelming for most. And so that's still a privilege that a lot of families don't have for a whole host of reasons. But I guess that's what I've seen. Well, even for my son, right? Going from one type of school now into a different type of gifted school, he's doing so much better. And I was so scared to switch schools. And yet, with some of those universal designs for learning, with things we're looking at being able to do X, Y, or Z, it's suddenly a part of his freedoms in school, whereas in a lot of schools, it wouldn't be. And he's
Can
really.
you talk a little bit more about that? What could you pinpoint something that maybe he would say too, that this is something that's way better and I'm feeling more supported by this now?
Part of it, I think, is teacher attitudes,
Yeah, that matters. That's big.
Yeah, he's super creative and he's made these films which I think are brilliant and hilarious. But they're edgy, right? And I'm like, oh, in the wrong type of school, or even, at first, even with this school, I was like, oh, are they going to actually find this humorous like I do? But to appreciate that gift versus being celebrated for being kind of different, he's felt so good about all the classmates are really, he's gotten some, standing ovation type of stuff, then I'm like, at his last school, they probably would have been like, "You're a weirdo," or I don't know what.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, being able to take breaks if needed, talk to mental health if needed, but he's not needing any of those things either, right? Just because it's just this more accepting environment. I'm trying to think of, depending on the student, what are those universal designs? Having different seating arrangements depending on what your needs are,
I think what you brought up around honoring what the student really needs instead of saying, "Oh, this is a 2E student, this is what they get." No, this is a human being. It's an individual. Yes, they do have these elements to them, but we have to figure out what works for them and not just give them a plan based on a label.
Right, right. And I was kind of excited to hear. I guess I haven't researched it myself yet, so it was news to me. If it's wrong, then we'll figure it out together. But he's not really needing the same supports he needed when he was younger, right? And also probably being in a better environment and everything else. And so we've really whittled down any types of things that need to be on a plan for him. My fear is you go, okay, everything's great. And so you drop the plan. And then when something's not great, shoot. And then you're starting from scratch and you're not protected and all of that.
Yeah.
And I was told that you can like kind of stay on a plan, but without accommodations and still have that protect you. So if you suddenly need, and I think a lot of times when you're talking about things that are more psychological, right, you can have your ebbs and flows for your needs, unlike maybe something like, dyslexia, where the needs are going to be pretty constant, at least in some respects. So that
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially as kids get older and enter high school, even. And what does that look like? And how does their plan need to change? So I think that's a great thing to encourage families as they walk through 504s and the changing needs of their student on really asking for, can we keep this plan in place while we try fewer accommodations or
right,
whatever it might be? So that, like you said, you don't have to press restart on getting back on a 504 if that's what the
right.
child
But
needs.
it's also exciting, right? And that's what it's not like whatever it is as a general rule, right? Let's say anxiety that placed a student on a plan in the first place. It doesn't necessarily go away, but especially for things more psychological, it can largely disappear for a while, but it's assumedly still kind of a part of you. But that doesn't mean that you're still going to need an IEP or a 504 or any of those types of plans for special education needs.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about any families that are new to 504, especially for a gifted student who might be starting a 504, going through the process. What advice would you have for families who are just getting into the 504 process for their gifted student?
I feel like it's pretty straightforward in some ways. Each school has to have a 504 coordinator. You don't necessarily have to have a disability label, but having as much evidence, I guess, of what the disabling condition is. That can be from outside sources that certainly should be also related to school and thinking about what types of accommodations you need. So it's different than an IEP where you're having specialists and maybe certain hours with different services and goals for the year, but it's typically what types of accommodations do you need? Do you need to have movement breaks? Do you need to be seated by the front? Do you need to have kind of a quiet space, maybe do less problems to show mastery of your work. It kind of totally depends on what type of need and disability we're talking about. But they're reviewed once a year, and it's kind of a broader or a lower threshold with 504s. Um, because it's really just looking at accommodations. Some of those things that hopefully in a great environment you may not need to say in the first place, but most of the time there's constraints, right? And I say suddenly if you move or you switch schools or you get a new teacher, they might say forget about it, you don't get those things in my class, everybody will do this at this time, and then you've got some protections. So
Yeah, I think that's a really one of the best arguments, especially when you have a student who is doing well right now in their current environment, and yet they qualify for a 504. And a family wonders, should I actually go through with it? And I'm of the same mind, yes, because you don't know what it's going to look like next year. You don't know if you have to change schools or whatever it might look like. So to make sure the accommodations are written down and they're getting what they need, regardless of the teacher, is huge.
right, right. Yeah, so for either, as long as you're in a public school, there's gonna be someone in charge of 504s. There's also really straightforward information on the Department of Ed website, but they have to go through that process and bring together a group of individuals, usually, especially for an IEP, it could be the different experts in the different areas you're looking at, maybe a speech language therapist, a psychologist, a special education teacher. You'll get a variety of people within a 504 meeting as well, and it can be modified or discontinued or added to at any time. But typically once a year, then you're reviewing. I've been on both ends quite a lot now. Yeah.
Yes, and it can be intimidating coming from outside of education to walk into a room with 7 people there ready to talk about your child. And hopefully your child's there too, as appropriate. Of
Yeah.
course, the involvement of the student is huge, and maybe that can happen outside of the 504 meeting instead of having them there. But I think as soon as they're ready, and we should have them sitting in the meeting as well, so they understand. I would encourage people to really ask all their questions. It's everyone sitting in that room is it's their job to make sure that you understand what's going on. And so if you don't understand something, to please ask. And also, when you leave the room, you don't have to sign the 504 that day. I think that's an important piece. Is if you need a night to just think about it, just to make sure all your questions are answered, and come back the next day and sign it, whatever it may be, to really feel like you're moving at the pace that your family feels is good, instead of feeling rushed to just go ahead and sign it.
And depending on the school, it can very much feel like everybody's already ready and they just want to talk at you and tell you the way it is. But that's not the way it's supposed to go. And it's absolutely supposed to be more of a dialogue and a group decision. And it's hard. I know on the other end, I'm with a school now where there's a lot of extreme poverty and challenges for the families and language barriers on top of it and all of these different barriers. But we're having these meetings and they get overly technical, right? People start dropping all the educational acronyms and everything right away and talking about bell curves and whatever they're talking about. And families are like, what the heck? So, how do you fit?
Yeah.
Hit that fine line where you want to make sure to really give all the information and you're not, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't want to be like pandering. Like, who knows? Maybe the family does want to hear all the details about whatever assessment you're using. But as a general rule, most families don't, right? And I can read the report.
Yeah.
I want to dig into that more later. Like, tell me more. What's it mean? Okay, you're using an actual standardized test. This is the percentile my child's at. And what about it? What does that mean?
Right. Put it contextually so it makes sense, but also explain it to someone who's not sitting there looking at reports every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they may need a different explanation. But like you're saying, not withholding information, but explaining it in a way that parents feel comfortable and families can ask questions too.
Yeah.
Have you seen any more unique accommodations for 2E students that might be worth sharing? I know there's a lot of extended time and separate seating and frequent breaks and things like that.
I think sometimes it can be relatively behaviorist based, where it's maybe charts or journaling, things going back home, goals, where then the students kind of monitoring their own behavioral success or anxiety techniques that they're working on or things like that. Behaviorism works for getting things rolling as far as like if you do this, then you get that reward. But no one likes it, and I gifted kids probably like it even less, like gross, right? Or what am I, your little puppet? And ooh, I'll give you this prize.
Yeah.
So I said it has to all start with relationship. And so you can't really force that by any means, but hopefully you've got people in charge and you've got teachers, or at least a teacher, someone, that genuine connection and that genuine caring is there. That's the base for everything.
Yeah. And I think the student ownership piece is huge, and anything that we can do to embed that ownership really fosters accountability in a way that doesn't have to be an if then situation, and it becomes more students growing in their own reflection of themselves. But like you said, that can't just flip a switch and that's going to happen. You do have to build a relationship with the student and make sure
They
that
know
works.
that we're creating these systems because we care and because it's to help them. And, otherwise it's like, why are you doing this to me? I was thinking about, especially related to psychological health and wellness with gifted, all the different psychological theorists that match with this. One would be Maslow, where, there's some evidence that gifted people are more likely to be able to transcend up to that kind of self-actualization or that those highest levels just by the way the mind works. But if we think about someone like Maslow, where the base of everything is supposed to be food, shelter, clothing, and so on, there's other people, William Glasser's one, who would say, no, the base of everything is relationship, period, like before food, shelter. And we've got lots of evidence for that too. So how do we need to be in a safe space and we need to be in positive relationship in order for things to flourish. And I think that's also where sometimes a gift can become a disability, or a disability can maybe become a gift, right? It's not static.
Yeah. And when we're thinking about, I know you've been in a lot of classrooms and seen really just what the state of instruction looks like right now. What can gen ed teachers do better regarding supporting the psychological well-being of all students? Of course, we're talking about 2E students specifically, but what helps in the classroom?
Well, besides going beyond what I was thinking of, again, the relationship piece, but gosh, that's just so key. So I think when we start losing sight of that, even if they're doing all the CMAS test prep or whatever, like everybody else, the kids know that these teachers love them, right? It's the little teeny things they do every day. And I think it's going to help the teacher too. They're going to be less likely to be burned out when they're working hard to connect or reconnect with students in a more authentic way, instead of just, oh, how much has their writing improved in the last couple weeks. So doing those little pivots. One thing that the school I work with talks about a lot is, what are the tiny things you can do that have a big impact? And so I think it's the standing and greeting kids at the door. It's making sure that we're connecting with them individually, right? That there's a safety and routine, right? So what happens as soon as you get into class? How do you wrap up class? Those are so basic and simple, and yet huge, huge impact, you know? And I know for me as a teacher too, especially ending was always hard for me, because I would be, I'd be into whatever I was doing. I had to start setting an alarm. So 5 minutes before class would end, my phone would go off and be like, oh, time to start wrapping up, Vanessa, because that's missing a lot.
Yeah, it makes me think about the psychological well-being of our teachers and whether or not that is a topic of conversation when we talk so much about the well-being of our students. So, do you have any insight on what that is looking like and how we can support as leaders, how we can support teachers better?
Yeah, it looks a little rough, I think, out in the world and out in the field today. I started following this principal on Facebook. I don't remember his name, but he's talking about what to do so the teachers feel supported. And again, it's little things, but important things like, being in the hall, wandering the hall at all times, like checking in one at a time individually, starting the day with something positive and making sure that they're seeing you versus going through your day never connecting with the teachers that you serve, right? Because it all trickles down. So you've got the principal who serves the teachers who serve the students, and everyone needs the support along the way. And then, of course, I've had the experience as well. Then, how the heck do you support the leaders, right? Because who's supporting them, and how can they keep that balance as well? But I can remember talking with you, I think 3 years or so back. I'm like, oh gosh, don't ever do this. And I caught it this year too, where someone said to me, let's talk at the end of the day. And I'm like, oh my God, what do they want to talk about?
Please no. Yeah.
That was one of the things that the principal said. He's like, never tell a teacher, because everybody's mind goes right away, right? Oh, what did I do? Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for this. But yeah, I think
Totally.
starting with the positives and making sure that there aren't surprises, because everyone is on edge, and giving time back. Everything's so darn important. But I know for myself on my end too, I will be given a list, and I know teachers feel the exact same way, of 20 things that are absolutely, they have to be done by the end of the week. And it's literally impossible, where there's no way, if you never slept, you never ate, you never did anything else, you still couldn't get through all those. And so scaling back, I think, and figuring out what's realistic. I think something that you've been advocating for a lot that is important is, what is that? What are the contracts supposed to be? And then how much are people actually doing? And I've Midwest Protestant work ethic. I can get extreme then, and I don't want to be extreme. I don't want to work 80 hours a week. Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, but
So
there's this idea of like efficiency that I don't know that people are really looking through this lens, and maybe with the development of AI, this can get better. But we're looking at, like you're saying, impossible jobs. We're looking at leaders also being given impossible tasks, and then them passing on impossible lists to teachers, and then expecting the teacher is going to do well in instruction that day and build relationships with students. We see that that's not working, and so I wonder how, especially in the special education world, and gifted world, around compliance tasks. How do we get more efficient so we can build better relationships with students? But also, I think leadership matters.
yeah,
It is hard to show up as a leader and say, I am drawing my line here and I'm not working any more than what I was hired to do. But I think it's going to take some courageous people standing up and doing that for teachers to follow, because it's not working, right? It's not working the way we want it to. And there's so much potential in our teaching staff and in our students.
that's why people are leaving in droves, right?
Yes, wonderful people that care so much and they're leaving the profession. It's really heartbreaking to see. As we wrap up here, I'd really just love some advice, encouragement. I want to leave our audience with some hope on, working with families or that have gifted students facing mental health challenges, or educators doing the same. What's some hope and some advice that we could leave them with?
I think part of it is that hope piece. What I see kids and adults right now dealing with is not necessarily feeling hope, and then we're goners, right? But, when I've been with people that maybe they're struggling with a deep depression or something like that, there are so many different avenues and there's so many different techniques and supports that we can try. And the likelihood that the very first thing you try is going to be the magic ticket is probably somewhat unrealistic, although it's possible. Do your research and whoop, you found it, and that's awesome. But that you give it a certain amount of time. It's like when you're in a school and you're trying a new intervention. So you find the good research based thing, you give it what, usually 2, 3 weeks, unless there's something huge happening one way or the other. You're giving it a couple of weeks to really do it with fidelity. And if it's not working, then you try the next thing, and there's always a next thing. I've just seen such miraculous things happen. I think sometimes we close ourselves off to the things that might be the best. So medication is certainly a topic where a lot of people have very strong feelings, and it's another time where there's stigma there as well. And yet I have seen nothing short of miracles, especially when we're talking about some psychological things, when someone gets the right meds. There's a lady I know that she has schizophrenia, and to the point where she didn't no longer believed her family was her family, her kids were her kids. She got on medication for the first time in probably close to a decade. And she's like, oh my God, what's been going on? Like I can't believe I didn't even recognize you. Like a miracle. Now, is she the one that still has a disability? Yes. But she's back to herself largely, and she's doing pretty well right now. And I've seen that in other things with anxiety, depression, OCD, bipolar, right? Like, and if it's not working or if it feels horrible, then you try something else, because there's all different types of medications as well. So not that that's the be all end all, but I've definitely seen needless suffering because of someone saying, I'll do anything but that, right? I'm never going to do meds, or I'm never going to try this therapy. Anyways, I would say be open, and if it's not working, that doesn't mean you have to do that med forever or that therapy forever. If you try it with fidelity for X amount of time and it's not working, then time to move on. But there's always a solution. And our job as the masterful sleuths that we are is to figure out what that is.
I think that's a really good point, to just know that whatever you're trying now, there is something else. So if you've given it the time and really done it the way that you're supposed to and the way that your team supports, and it's not working, to keep trying, not to just stop there. I remember a student I taught in fourth and fifth grade. And in fourth grade, is pretty evident the student had ADHD, and the dad said, "Oh, I do too, but I don't want my child medicated." And I was like, "Of course, that's your choice." And that was a very rough year for that student. And
I can say I don't believe they learned a whole lot just because of the challenges that they were having. The parents decided to try medication, and the next year was totally different for that child, and ended up getting a gifted label at the end of that year for some things that teachers weren't seeing
Right.
because of an inability to focus. And I remember this note, this sweet fifth grade boy wrote me that said, after he was on medication, I never knew how much you taught us until now. And thank
Aw,
you so much. It was really sweet, but it was really just me seeing his reflection of, wow, look what I've been missing. Look what I've been
yeah,
missing. And he got it. And so, of course, that's not going to be everyone's story. It's worth a try. The parents, they've tried without, and they said, hey, let's try with and see what happens. And maybe it's not a forever thing, right? Maybe it's a for right
absolutely,
now thing. So there's always something else to try. There's always hope to keep going.
absolutely. Yeah, and we see
Thank you
those
for
stories.
chatting with me, and I'm going to put your information on our website on hex24press.com so people can contact you and see other books that you've written and any of your upcoming conferences that you'll be at to stay connected. So thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
All
Bye-bye.
right, talk to you soon. Bye.
Sounds good.
This episode of Exceptionally Speaking is brought to you by Hex 24 Press, where education meets imagination. I founded Hex 24 Press in 2024 to uplift educator voices and provide a publishing home for myself and other educators to bring our work into the world. You can find more information about today's guests, including links to their resources and services, at hex24press.com. Thank you for supporting educators, independent creators, and small business. We're so glad you're here.